to about communicating with people when you can't be face to face. Ways we do this are Google Meets with teachers, the Snapchatting your friends, or even being in contact with people not being able to be face to face. We use this on platforms like TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram.
These are all pretty new technologies that require a lot of infrastructure and moving parts that we don't normally see. We've all experienced the inconvenience of having our Zoom meeting, our internet dropping us from a Zoom meeting, or lost service when we're trying to have a phone call because we have good reception. But what if there was no Wi-Fi or cell service, or even internet to keep us connected?
Now, I know we've not all had these technologies for that many years, and humans manage just fine without them, but staying in touch and connecting with others has always been really important to the new generation. There's always been a variety of ways to do this, but today we are going to talk about a form of communication that is still used today, known as amateur radio, or how we like to call it, ham radio.
It's not clicking. What is ham radio? Ham radio is another name for amateur radio. And in case you're wondering why it's called ham, it's named after the founders of an amateur radio station. The names of the founders of the amateur radio station: Albert S. Hyman, Bob Alney, and Poogie Murray, who decided to take the first initial of each of their last names and put it together, HAM. What do you get? Ham. People who use amateur radio are called hams in the radio community. Amateur radio, or ham radio, can be used for various purposes, but can be especially useful in emergency situations. And people can even use it in outer space.
You're probably familiar with walkie-talkies like this one, which this may sound similar to. Walkie-talkies are handheld transceivers and nothing more than just a handheld radio. They can only transmit one way at a time, meaning you can only talk or listen at any given point. Radio wave frequencies that work with walkie-talkies are typically limited to line of sight, and things like hills or metal can block the signal, which is why you can't usually travel very far when using one of them. To give you a better understanding of what ham radio is, I want you to think of it as a considerably more complicated walkie-talkie. By using these devices, I can communicate with someone else with a walkie-talkie as long as they're within a certain distance. So if Jack and I want to talk using these devices, we can. But what we can do with them is very limited than what we could do with ham radio.
How does ham radio work? Ham radio uses radio waves to transmit signals back and forth. Unlike walkie-talkies, ham radio allows for two-way communication, meaning you can be receiving a signal and listening to someone else talk, while also sending a signal to that person, kind of like you're on the phone with them. You can also use ham radio over long distances. This is because radio waves used for ham radio are able to bounce off antennas in space, off of repeaters on mountaintops, and are not as disrupted by hills and other things in their way. In fact, ham radio waves can even be bounced off the atmosphere itself, but more on that later. Put it simply, ham radio uses radio waves to transmit signals back and forth between devices. In fact, radio waves allow us to do many different things.
Like Ellie just said, radio waves allow us to do many different things. Here I have a list of just some of the things that can only happen because of radio waves. For example, radios, television broadcasts, Wi-Fi, GPS, key monitors, cell phones, and of course, ham radios. We don't always think of how much goes into all these things, but I can promise there's a lot more to it than you would expect. To start to understand how these things work, you need to know a little bit more about radio waves.
What are radio waves? Radio waves are a type of electromagnetic wave that carries energy through the atmosphere and falls within a certain frequency range, which is really low frequencies with long wavelengths. Within the spectrum of radio waves, though, there is a wide range of frequencies and wavelengths that allow us to do different things. To get really specific, the range of the radio spectrum is considered to be 3 kilohertz and up to 300 gigahertz.
Lower to medium frequencies can be used over longer distances and aren't as disrupted by rocks and water, so they are perfect for communicating with submarines and airplanes. Higher frequency waves allow us to broadcast television, listen to FM radio in our cars, and use our cell phones, and even GPS. The highest frequencies allow for shorter distances, but high bandwidth communication. This works for things like Bluetooth and Wi-Fi.
In between the high frequencies like FM radio and the highest frequencies like Bluetooth, there are bands known as shortwave bands, which can be very high frequency or ultra high frequency. Shortwave bounce off the ionosphere from the transmitter to the receiver's antenna, so they can be used for longer distances. Like I mentioned earlier, there are radio systems on mountaintops and antennas in space that are called repeaters. These repeaters take shortwave bands and repeat the signal so it can travel further than ham radio waves can typically travel. This is how ham radio can connect hams with other hams all over the world. And even in outer space, which brings us to our next point. Why is ham radio relevant to this conference and NASA in general?
How is ham radio relevant to NASA? Ham radio can be used to talk to astronauts aboard the International Space Station. All astronauts are encouraged to get their ham license before aboard. Anyone with a scanner can listen in on the communications that take place between Earth and space. And if you have a transmitter, you can even listen in on the conversations as well. As astronauts, the astronauts can use ham radio to talk to their family weekly if they have a ham license. It can also serve as a backup communication to talk back to the crew back on Earth. Amateur radio on the International Space Station is a program that offers an opportunity for students like you and I to get the excitement to experience talking to the astronauts aboard the International Space Station, some of whom decide to tune in randomly to see who they can connect with. Ham radio is not only used to communicate with astronauts, though in fact many hams simply enjoy it as a hobby.
Like Lily just said, many people enjoy ham radio as a hobby, and because it is pretty well controlled and can be a safe way to meet new friends across the world. There are a lot of different things people can do with ham radio. Some hams partake in a competition to see how far away they can connect with other people, or how many people they can connect with in a given amount of time. For fun, some hams try to bounce their radios off the moon, or try to send things like pictures using nothing but radio waves. There are quite a few rules to follow, but the one I think is pretty interesting is that every radio operator has to have their own call sign that you have to make sure you say while you're sending signals. This is like if you have ever been in a car and you're listening to the radio and you hear them say 99.9 The Buzz or 98.9 WOKO. That is their call sign and they legally have to say it every 10 minutes. A lot of people who use ham radio as a hobby are part of volunteer-based groups who are able to provide relief in emergency situations or use ham radio for other community services. In fact, ham radio is incredibly useful in emergency situations.
Like Jack just said, ham radios become super useful in emergency situations. Even though ham radios can transmit signals around the world, the average ham radio can reach up to 20 miles, depending on how long the antenna is. This 20-mile radius can be huge in emergency situations like a natural disaster, severe power outage, or times when internet is down. When all other forms of communication can't be used because the infrastructure that supports them is down, ham radio comes in handy because it only requires batteries. So like Jack mentioned, many ham hobbyists use their ham radio skills to help out in times of need in a community. In fact, ham radio proved to be super helpful when Hurricane Katrina and Hurricane Maria hit to help reestablish communication networks. This proved to be so effective that it resulted in an effort to get even more hams licensed as well.
So now that you know some things about that ham radio can do, I want to provide you with a little bit of background knowledge on how it got to where it is at today. In 1873, James Clerk Maxwell presented his theory on the electromagnetic field. In 1896, Guglielmo Marconi figured out how to send a signal 2 miles without wires. By 1901, he was able to communicate across the Atlantic Ocean with the radio using giant antennas. Marconi is recognized as the first amateur radio operator. In 1910, there were thousands of amateur radio operators, but unfortunately, it was shut down in World War One because there was too much interference with all the other radio signals. The government assigned bands, which were basically worthless for long distance communications. It picked back up in 1917, but was restricted again during World War II until 1946 when the restrictions were lifted. Fast forward a few decades to 1983, when Owen Garriott, an astronaut who was aboard the space shuttle, was able to successfully communicate with hundreds of bands. This was the beginning of having almost every shuttle crew include licensed amateurs to communicate with Earth. Shortly after that, ham radio became more widely used by volunteers and communities. Now there are three different classes of ham licenses you can get, which are technician, extra, and general. And the best part of it is anyone can be a ham.
How can I be an amateur radio operator, also known as a ham? It's not as easy as you may think. First, you need to get your license in order to operate it. In order to get your license, you have to take a 35-question multiple choice test. There is a $20 fee, but depending on where you live, it may be less. All questions are available to study online. Give yourself time before the test, which means give yourself 2 to 4 weeks to study. Make sure you pass the test with a 75 or higher to get your license. There is a few rules, but one that really stuck out to me was be nice when using the radio because there is a chance you get your license taken away. You can even get involved in the local Champlain Valley Amateur Radio Club, the link in the corner. We hear a lot about character traits or soft skills, or even the essential skills, and they are so important on all of our research of ham radio. It becomes clear that we have not made it here today in terms of how we're able to communicate with others.
Or for the curiosity of Guglielmo Marconi, who wondered how far he could send a signal. With his perseverance and grit, he was able to keep working until he communicated across the Atlantic.
Social intelligence and self-control are so important when communicating over ham radio, and zest and optimism add so much more, and can help form connections with people wherever your radio waves may reach.
Ham radio also can help develop so many of these skills and provide you with so many opportunities to expand your network or practice your leadership abilities. Whether you choose to become a ham or not, just know that the determination and zest of all the hams before you have truly helped pave the way for endless opportunities.
And before we end off, I would like to give a huge thank you to everyone who's helped us along the way with this presentation. First is our 8th grade science teacher, Miss Danville, who not only gave us this opportunity to learn about ham, but helped us with our character traits and essential skills. She also helped us so far along the way. Next is Mr. Matthew Craig. He's a member of the Champlain Valley Amateur Radio Club and a teacher at Mariah Center School. He has his ham license, so he was able to share his knowledge of ham radio with us. Thank you, Matthew. Next is Mr. Matthew Reeves. He partnered with the CFES Brilliant Pathways and helped mentor us along the way. He also gave us a ton of public speaking tips. Thank you, Matthew. Next is Mr. Stephen Bedard, a member of the CFES Brilliant Pathways. He helped Ms. Mallory find research to help us with this presentation. Next is Ms. Mallory. She helped us so far along the way, and she helped us tremendously with the process. We couldn't thank her even more. Thank you, Ms. Mallory. And finally is the Shine On at Cindy Plattsburgh, who made this whole event possible. Thank you, Shine On. And now that we're over, this is a question slide, so if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. That's all. I know it's kind of boring, but now this is your time to ask questions.
All right, if anybody has any. All right, if anybody has any questions, feel free to go into the Q&A chat and send that in there and we can do that. I hope everyone enjoyed our workshop. Wanna be a ham? I know I did. The downlink is anticipated to begin at 10:30. I will be sending a link in the group chat. Please click the link in the chat to watch or go to the conference brochure and click on the download link. All right. Thank you so much, guys. We have a question. The question is, in your time learning about amateur radio, what did you enjoy learning about the most?
That's a tough question because I enjoyed this presentation a lot and I learned definitely a lot about ham radio. But I think I enjoyed just like finding out the rules because I didn't even know what ham radio was when I went into the presentation. But like the rules and that you could get your license taken away kind of stuck out. I don't know about you guys.
I found it interesting on all the different things you can do with ham radio, like how you can communicate shorter distances and longer distances, and how much scientific stuff goes into using it, and just that stuff in general.
I thought that, to be honest, the history part was my favorite because I found out that I thought somebody else made it, but I didn't know that James Clerk Maxwell presented his theory about the electromagnetic field.
I definitely enjoyed a lot about this presentation and working with these three. They're very talented and brilliant. But my favorite part would probably have to be history as well. Just figuring out like what went into it and how it came about.
All right, awesome. Thank you, Matthew, for asking the question. If anybody else would like to put in some questions, now's the time. I think we just got one more. Do you think any of you will get your license when you're older to use ham radio?
I don't know. That's a good question though. I think it would be intriguing just to do maybe when I'm a little older as a hobby, but maybe in the future. I mean, I don't really know yet.
I actually did think about getting it when we first started this, so I could actually use it while doing this, but I actually didn't have enough time to prepare myself to study for the test, and so I would have been able to, but maybe later in the future I will.
I probably will actually do that. From what we learned, it sounds really fun.
Probably not myself. I probably won't. But if the school got a program, I would definitely like use it. So that'd be something I would look into, but not for myself.
Don't see any questions right now. I'll give it one more minute if anybody would like to throw another one in there. All right, I don't see any other questions, so we're going to end it for today. Please go ahead and click the link in the chat to go to the NASA TV at 9 or 10:30, or you can go into our brochure to click it. All right. Thank you so much, guys. Have a great night.